believe we are taping now. Yes, and I'm going to share again the screen. Okay, perfect now. Sorry, no, thank you.
Is there a button command that I can use?
I don't think you have it here now. I think you have to use or
I have one. That's okay. I can just
okay. So just use the this round thing. But it's much better than the last time we had a room session, because in those days there was a problem with University of Lisbon that there was a delay in I don't know, renovating the contract or something, and we had to use the Zoom of our guest to share. And that's what it was in Michigan, but it worked.
And at least it worked. Okay. Thank you all. So I'm going to present about the decline processes in technological innovation systems. This is a collaborative work that I've been doing with my two colleagues, Alejandro Núñez, who managed from Harvard Kennedy School in TH Zurich, and Noah Kinner. And also in the beginning of this process, and I think I remember that, Jochen Markard was also in the team. Meanwhile, had to move to other. He even moved from the one university to the other. But yeah, I should thank him because it's at the growth. We started with this paper on the decline of nuclear energy, and then we actually want to see if there are processes more than just focusing on a single technology, comparing other technologies and seeing whether there are processes that can be accelerated to put old technologies that pollute a lot, that have annoyances or some problems, to phase out more faster in order to leave more room for the new technologies to come, because it's a matter of decarbonizing more rapidly. So yeah, that gives us the motivation for this work. So the outline that I prepared for today, I'm starting with the aims and motivation. I already gave you some motivation. Then I will elaborate a bit more on the conceptualization of the way that we are theorizing functions of decline. Then I will show you how we analyze the decline of technological innovation systems. In this case, we are going to show you at least 4 innovation systems. We have done more, but these 4 actually are more documented. We did. And then we are going to apply this methodology to these 4 technologies before discussing and taking some take-home messages and conclusions. So first of all, aims and conclusions. So we're talking about a growing focus in the literature because of this need, of this urgency to accelerate decarbonization. The literature more and more is focusing on the phasing out of the technology. So there has been, until here, lots of thinking and publication around the formation of new technologies, of new technology and innovation systems. I will return to that, to the systems part in a minute, but only to focus that on, only to see that there has been more and more thinking on the way that we need to accelerate the phase out of old conventional technologies in order to have more rapid transitions to more sustainable societies and systems. So as I told you, up to now, we have more knowledge about the way that the systems are formed, what are systems. So as you can understand, technologies doesn't work alone. It's not because a marvelous, a brilliant engineer came up with a very good solution, that this solution is going to be adopted in the market and it's going to diffuse. We need institutions, for that we need actors. We need to settle down networks in order to produce this institution, to commercialize, and to use the institution. So that's why we are talking here as technological systems, in a systems perspective instead of technologies. So the matter here is to study, okay, we know lots in terms of formation, of function of innovation systems, technological innovation systems, but what about the senescence, the end of technological innovation systems? So there is clearly here a gap, and we actually try to understand if there are processes that actually are connected or in the system and the final and the terminal life of the technological innovation system that actually contribute for the system to decline. And the idea is actually if there are these processes or functions, we call here functions. So what type of functions are this? And in order to, at the end, we want to also to make actions. The idea is to identify the processes in order to use them as leverages to accelerate the change. So that's the aims and also the motivation behind this study. So quick words about the conceptualization. Here is the departure. So what we have now to start the conceptualization on declining functions. So first of all, we tap on social sciences theories. We have different perspectives. I'm only presenting 3 of those. Economics perspective, perspective in institutional or institutionalism theory, and the management perspective, management studies. So, business, economics is not the same stream. Nowadays, recognize very well too, economics and business or management. And even in management, you can find organizational studies. There are lots of them. But just taking these 3 perspectives, you will see that they are complementary, because each one look at different angles. So decline in economics is a process of diminishing financial resources due to changes in the markets and technology. So it's a matter of having less legitimacy, and the fact that we have less legitimacy reduces the access to the key resources. It's pretty much in this sense. In the institutional way, here is really a matter of legitimacy, the process of losing political legitimacy, losing social acceptance. And in the realm of management studies, decline is more seen as interactive processes that happen both inside and outside the firms, highlighting the agency of actors. So here is clearly the idea of agency, the idea of strategies of the actors, the idea of technologies that can appear, can be disruptive, can change everything. But all this, as I said in the beginning, all these approaches actually complement each other to have a broader view. But we tap on these ideas to try to create our own perspective on decline, but actually tapping also on the way that decline has been theorized in sustainability transitions literature. Just a minor note to say that on the past Thursday, on Thursday we have here in ISCTE and also in a meeting with Mario's team of this Sustainable Trends project. This is, by the way, an outcome of work package 2. We received Bernard Truffer, who is one of the founder authors in this field of sustainable transitions. He gave a small introduction on the field. They explained the roots. The idea is clearly different than standard mainstream economics, with all the short-term stability and all this rationality assumptions. Here is more on not on linearity against linearity, and more everything evolving in the long term. But he explained it, the assumptions and the 3 main, let's say, families that exist in sustainability transitions, such as multi-level perspective. Some of these theories maybe you already recognize. There is multi-level perspective. There is technological innovation systems, which actually we are elaborating here, and there's also strategic niche management. Returning to our conceptualization of functions of decline, so this is the goal: conceptualizing functions of decline. There's been functions for formation. Now it's a matter of seeing or testing whether there's also a room for functions of decline. So we depart from this idea, more from this multi-level perspective thing, that external pressures can destabilize the regime. So probably I should mention what is multi-level. So the idea of multi-level is that you have three strata. One is niches. So the idea is that new ideas, new concepts form niches, and then when the upper level of the context, which is kind of the culture, the big long-term policies, if something happens that disturbs the regime, which is in the middle of the two, actually opens windows for technologies in the niche to transform the regime, to transform the configuration of the regime. And here clearly, it has been shown that external pressures gives more room for the stabilization of the regime. They're also connected. These pressures can be of socio-political nature or of techno-economic nature. That means either it's a matter of acceptance, something changed, more discussion about climate change, or there is Trump winning the elections, and climate change is not anymore a priority or an issue. And on the other hand, techno-economic, meaning that there's new technologies coming that actually make the old technologies less performant. So pressures can destabilize the regime, but also policies. There are some starting analysis on the way that policies and policies mix can actually change the configuration of the regime, can perturb the functioning of the regime, and thus destabilizing it. And finally, deliberate decline, which actually encompasses the deliberate by policy, so by the public instruments, but also by citizen instruments. Because even the citizens can start collective actions in order to change states. We have seen already some of these examples for instance, Bernard mentioned the small cooperatives in the beginning in Germany to start with photovoltaics because they were a bit angry with nuclear. They wanted something different, some alternatives back to the 90s. And this created actually the momentum for investing in solar PV, which actually was very important to start the learning curve, and they have solar PV available at so cheap costs nowadays. So deliberate decline also encompassing the private action. The maturation of systems actually has been shown in the literature as a succession of phases. So this is pretty much inspired, so a systematic interpretation of the technology and industry life cycle, which actually applies to the life cycle of systems the way that this theory has seen or has conceived the lifetime of industries and technologies. And so, in a recent paper, Jochen actually, for the let's say the structural elements of technological innovation systems, that means actor-based, institutional structure networks, technology performance and variation, and context relations with the system. He finds characteristics, or he shows characteristics by relating to this management strategy theories. He shows characteristics for each one of these structures. For instance, for actor-based, one of the characteristics of technological innovation system in the major phase is that sales start to be below maximum, so sales start to decrease, number of companies start to exit the industry, intermediaries lose influence, and there is increasing conflicts, which actually the conflict thing is kind of spread across also to the institutional structure, the networks. I will also cite this part what happens in the context. We will see for the examples. Ties break up, dependent context structures decline as well. So there are an increase of more pressures, competitive pressures, more conflicts, and more alternatives. And also the institutions start to be not as supportive. So that's kind of the main takeaway of these characteristics in the major phases. And finally, just to sum up, there are some context changes that can trigger these functions of decline. So on the one hand, the deterioration of social acceptance. On the other hand, the appearance of the emergence of better alternatives. So this is kind of the most important slide I had for conceptualization. I think I have one more, but this was the most important one. This sums up the introduced and sums up the four main functions of decline that appear from the literature. And these functions, actually, we don't invent them. This starts from something, and let me tell you what this comes from. So I told you that formation, the functions of formation are pretty well known. This is a work that started in the beginning of the year 2000, mainly with some authors from Scandinavia. Two of them actually have worked a lot on functions, which are Stefan Jacobsen and Anna Bedje. In the beginning, she changed her name because in the beginning she was Anna Jonsson, but then she married and got her husband's name. And actually, these were kind of the foundations of the list of functions of innovation. So she started to see lots of industries created in Scandinavia. They follow, for instance, wind, not just wind, biogas, a couple of them. So they came up with the identification of processes and very well documented processes that in the beginning were only four. They noticed that market formation was very important, legitimation was very important. So they started from four, and then actually the list consolidated to 7 or 8. And it was very interesting because at the same time, around the year 2007, 2008, a different group in Europe, in Utrecht University, a group led by Marcus Baker, studied a bunch of technologies and come up with a similar, not the same, list of functions. And this list of functions actually are, the one from the Utrecht and the one from Belgium are quite similar. So actually, what we did, we started with these 7 functions, and we tried to see. Well, the question was, from these functions, what are the functions that can be read in the negative way? So in a way that if we put it in the negative form has a sense, and let's see whether this connects with the literature, the conceptualization I just presented. And so we come up with this 4-1, which clearly indicate some principles of decline. First of all, delegitimation. There's a big focus on legitimation as an important process for formation. Here, the thing is, maybe delegitimation is an important process for decline of the concept of a technology. Here, the idea is that the system loses its social license to operate. So there is less and less acceptance. Compliance with the relevant institutions and norms becomes increasingly difficult, which might induce the deliberate efforts to hinder it. This is seen as inappropriate or undesirable. And the mechanisms are indicators that could sign this dysfunction, maybe growing concern, disappointment about the system, and the system dysfunctionality. We will see one clear example of that: social movements against the system, mounting pressure in the media, in the policy, wherever. First, the legitimation. Second, function, and still in this realm of social deterioration, guidance toward exit. So the idea of guidance is really the attractiveness of a technology. So for formation, guidance would be guidance of search, because the idea is a technological innovation system is sufficiently attractive with so many profit opportunities that lots of supply chain actors from other sectors will have interest to come. Lots of people now are investing in digital innovations because they see there are numerous opportunities there. So In this case, we could say that digital innovations is clearly giving guidance for search. There are all other actors coming from other sectors to digital innovations. So here is the opposite. Here, the system becomes an attractive for actors from within or outside to reinforce the supply chain, inducing exit rather than entry. So it's the opposite. And the mechanisms be, for instance, worsening expectations, disappointing performance, and stakeholder attention that goes away from the system. On the other hand, on the aspect of lower demand, because of other alternatives, for instance, we have market decline. Market formation is another key. For people in technological innovation systems, all functions are key, okay? But we know that from the way that the list was created, there were some of the functions that were pointed out in the beginning. This one was one of the first ones, market formation. Here, we hypothesized that market decline is also a key function. So here, demand for the system, for the technological innovation system, shrinks, and our substitutes appear and grow in the market. It can be driven by loss of policy support or deliberate efforts to curb demand. So indicators should be indicated by volume sales or the market shares, costs, or regulations and bans. Finally, resource demobilization. This is clearly an important function for forming systems. Forming systems need resources to create infrastructures. But here the idea is that the resources somehow and somewhere disappear. So it is that flows of human financial capital dries up and becomes increasingly difficult to access, and for that, key players abandon the actor networks. So this would be shown by exit of firms and suppliers, fragmentation of the networks, and loss of complementarity. So this is actually the functions that we hypothesize and we want to test with our cases. So this graph shows you the method we followed to study these functions. So starting with the method, so we actually adopt multi-method approach, starting with expert solicitations, semi-structured interviews, expert interviews to select the cases. So here the point was to let what type of cases are the most relevant now of ongoing transitions to test our decline functions. Then in the second stage, we implemented a directed literature review. So it was a systematic literature review, not as systematic as you used to see with nowadays with artificial intelligence. No, it's just a simple with a long string still research with World of Science and Scopus. We found out over 1,000 papers. Then we did we read the titles, the abstracts in small pieces of the paper, of the articles, and then from this over 1,000, we cleaned lots of them, because some of them were from biology, nothing to do. They were paired out, and from those that actually we retained, we did snowballing techniques to find papers that were missing, and we came up with 66 papers. We must say that decline is a new topic. So it has not been very fashionable to work on decline. So that's why there are not still a lot of papers on decline. So we came up to this, I forgot to mention that the four cases are internal combustion engine cars. So if you look around, if you see the electric vehicles, it's everything from vehicles that you look around. Heating oil boilers, nuclear power, and condensate light bulbs. So all conventional light bulbs. This case actually cover a wide type of technologies in terms of different stages of decline. So we have the conventional light bulbs that you are not seeing anymore, especially in Europe, to IC cars, which actually started the phase out. In the midterm, we have nuclear power and heating oil boilers. By the way, for some specialists in Portugal, nuclear power is not in decline, it's the solution for climate change. So that gives you a perspective that this is polemical. Okay, there are people that see nuclear not in decline, but actually in the solution. End of the parenthesis. So this also corresponds to different types of sectors. We have here supply technologies and also technologies from the demand side. Mobility clearly from demand, that's with IC cars, heating against from demand, heating and oil boilers, but then a different service, which is electricity generation from supply, nuclear power, lighting again from demand side. And we took the most relevant market for that technology, or the market that is leading the dynamic. For instance, for nuclear, we took the first markets of what main markets in Europe, of nuclear, clearly in Europe and North America, in the beginning, in Japan, so OECD mostly. And for instance, in the case of heating oil, it's, the representative region is clearly the US, but there are other markets such as Denmark, but clearly more covered than the US. So we are looking at the countries which are central for that technology and are showing the clear dynamic. So we took all this and we applied the function. We analyzed by applying the functions of decline that I showed you in the first slide. Let me start with the functions from the social political pressure. Okay, and we start, of course, with nuclear. Nuclear, it's all about perception, it's all about acceptance. So you know that after the accident of 3 Mile Island, and especially after Fukushima, because 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl in 1985, there was a huge reaction against nuclear. I have already told you that triggered in Germany a reaction for people in rural areas. They wanted to change completely, to phase out nuclear and start new alternatives as photovoltaics. But then there was a major effort from countries, from this industry to reframe the expectations. They eventually recovered the expectations, and then boom, we had Fukushima, and that was clearly, so the 3 Mile Island accident was about 1980, Chernobyl 85, 87, then Fukushima around 2011. And we see that after this, especially after Chernobyl, lots of permanent shutdowns, but especially after 2011, there was much more, let's say, a clear increase in permanent shutdowns. So this is where that capacity increased over time, green for construction, permanent shutdowns in grid. So why that? It's not that there were more shutdowns. There was also a revision of the regulations. So regulations have to be tighter, stricter, and therefore more costly to build the new power plants. And at the same time, they were pushed by the loss of social acceptance. Lots of governments actually adopted phased out policy. So before Fukushima, Germany was considering to renew licenses for nuclear power plants after, where it was under Chancellor Merkel. They clearly phased out, they imposed a phase out on policies for the review of the license. So nuclear must stop in Germany. That was the main direction. Nowadays, with all what is happening in Ukraine, there is one or the other country that is revising this policy. For instance, Belgium is considering to not pursue its phase out, but clearly the number of countries phasing out nuclear has been increasing, especially in the past decade. And that led more costs, less opportunities for profits for the industry. Lots of key players in this industry started to mount losses. We'll see that in a minute. And I could cite a few of them. You will have the whole list in the paper that we have published. After GE, companies like GE, General Electric, so from the US, left the networks, left this industry. There was an old fragmentation of the networks. So I'm going to show you very rapidly. So this is what happened over time. So over time, so from lighter color is back to the 70s, and darker purple color is more recently, data from Sovacol. We see that the over budget, the overtime of the projects, that means projects starting to the construction and this contract, the construction period in the beginning was, let's say, thought to last for 5 years. It doesn't last for 5 years. It lasts 50% of the time more, so 7 years and a half, or 10 years, or even more. Okay, and we see that more and more projects actually enter in overtime. What happens if you buy a house and the people that are going to construct your house tell you that this is going to last 6 months, and at the end it's not going to last 6 months, it's going to last 5 years. It means that these people need to pay, need to receive money, so and material costs will increase, especially in the moment we have. So it happens the same thing, and even the regulation is not the same. So you have to comply with the new regulation. So we come to over budget. And just to make a long story short, I will tell you this anecdote, which is true. I finished my PhD in 2010, and they were in France, and they were already speaking about the end of the nuclear power plant in Flamanville, back in 2010, and the end of a similar power plant in Sweden. Today, the power plant in Sweden just started to operate, so 10 years afterwards, and the power plant in Flamanville, now the best schedule is in 2 years now. And the schedule meanwhile, and the budget has exploded to 7 times the expected budget in the beginning. So for those in Portugal that defend that nuclear is very cheap, well, maybe they should look at this chart. So what happened in the meanwhile, from the beginning till in the decadal way. So this is the network of the suppliers of the supply chain from the beginning till the planet in 2030. So this decade. We saw a pretty, let's say, consolidated network in the 70s and the 80s. But after that, because there were, remember this first graph after the accidents, there were less opportunities for the suppliers, and the suppliers started to mount losses, and they started to quit and to exit. And when the central suppliers left, like GE, Central One, GE was up there, and Japanese Toshiba. If you have the Toshiba great computers, you no longer are able to buy a new Toshiba because of the losses they did with the turbine division. Actually, they had to stop other divisions, and one of those was the computers, which is a pity because they really had good computers, solid machines. So yeah, that was what happened. And nowadays, this is very interesting. All these marginal networks, as you know what type of regions have very active. It's all democracies like China, Russia. You see the point. So with nuclear, in the meanwhile, so red, you have the electricity share, so the share of electricity in electricity mix, of the global mix. It has reached a top around the year 2000, and since then it has decreased, especially after Fukushima. So, and we see that the capacity after 2000 has been barely unchanged, with a reduction right after Fukushima. So we see that there is less opportunities, and here is the why the market is in decline or stabilized, and in terms of market share, clearly in decline. So to sum up, actually this was the situation back to the day, back to the 1970s. It's pretty much on green. So the idea here being that one is for several multi-criteria of decline, let's say signs. Green is there's little sign of decline. Red, you see the point, is that there is an evident sign of decline. You have the actors, and for all the dimensions I showed you in the conceptualization part. We see that clearly today, nuclear is not in the best shape, especially when we compare to previous, let's say, market in terms of scaling. So there, nuclear clearly did all the scaling possible. If they even scaled too much, that nowadays the scale of the nuclear power plants are not anymore 1.52 gigawatts, or about 1 gigawatt. Construction time is a mess. So clearly, nuclear is a technological innovation system. I have an example of a technological innovation system in troubling times. So just to close this chapter, there are nowadays lots of talks about the potential of small nuclear. Small nuclear is beautiful, but the problem with the technologies is that it's not, even the people that are commercializing this, there is no commercialization. Let's put it that way. But even people that pretend this is a very good solution, they will tell you that this is not ready for next year, not the other. We still need a couple of years to start experimenting with the technology, and yeah, it's not a ready technology. Problem is, we have a country in Europe which actually is betting lots on small nuclear because of political economy. You have a strong industry connected with nuclear, and this country name is France. Okay, so let's now move on to another technology which actually shows, is a good example of social political pressure triggering decline dynamics, which is internal combustion engine cars. So here I put on top, changing context is driving the decline. What happened? So several things happened, just putting in a short way. There was something. You remember what happened in 2016 with IC cars? Someone remembers that?
These are
The German cars in the US that were, no.
Yes, exactly.
The emissions were
Were dodged. Yeah,
Yeah.
they were misreported.
manipulated, like.
Exactly. There was a dodgy software that actually underreported the emissions. Whenever the software is
Yeah. Well, apparently no, because they were discovered that people found out that actually was not affected of that.
Exactly. And never they feel that they were testing, all the settings changed, and it gave a wrong idea of the environmental performance of the car. So this was called the Dieselgate, and Volkswagen was in the middle of the ring. Yeah, there was this, and 5 years before, do you remember the ads, for instance, of a Golf?
That's out.
That's out. But I don't know if some of you may have passed a couple of days, weeks, years in France or in other countries. There is this brand, for cleaning, Mr. Proper. There's so what they did was they put a Mr. Proper with a Golf, lots of leaves and stuff, because they were selling that Golf is very efficient. It doesn't consume a lot. So if you want to be cleaner, you should buy a Go. 5 years before, they were really putting on greenwashing, and look what happened in 2015 and 16. We discovered.
But actually, I don't want to interrupt you. But in the 70s, Golf was the first car designed for the oil crisis, post-oil crisis. So because it consumed only a fraction of other cars, half, more or less 40% less.
Yeah.
So Golf always had this image of quality and efficiency in
And
terms of
improving the environment again
since the 70s.
And nowadays, nowadays there are people saying the way they are marketing this ID3 and ID4. And the ID3 is almost the same price as the ID4, except that the ID3 is of the size of the Golf, whereas the ID4 is of the size of an SUV. And the critics say that actually they are trying to make money from the ID3 to pay all the process in the court because of this kind of. But clearly more there's a rising awareness of the problems of externalities of cars on the street. We do see these externalities. We see cars everywhere. So no parking lots. The quality of air is very bad. More reports on the impacts on long-term health related problems. And so there is a rising awareness about it and about climate change. Something must be done. And at the same time, of course, the governments react to this loss of acceptance and loss of trust from the society. And so there is a growing number of started with companies, but then it also spilled over to governments to regulate, phase out, and bans of this technology by 2025 because of Volvo, 2030, and 2035. I think in Europe it's about 2035 exactly. So the idea is by 2035 there should be no sale of internal combustion engine cars in Europe. And that should include also hybrids. Okay, so this clearly creates kind of an end to this technology, at least that directs the research. And at the same time, and this is the difference for other technologies, there was a clear alternative that happened, and which makes this bans actually not just feasible but credible, which is the EVs, which are actually improving in terms of performance. We have better cars with less problems associated with more range, and with costs. But let's be frank, nowadays a normal EV costs almost as much as a Porsche costs, 50,000, 60,000. Maybe that gives us a sign that this was actually on the news in Austria this week. Maybe automakers are changing the business model, and they want to sell cars for the rich, for the 1% rich. So because all the EVs they are coming out lately are just over 50,000 euros for a car, clearly not for the masses. But yeah, so just a couple of graphs on this. Innovation on IC vehicles. This is a recent paper from this Weiss and Net. Actually, what they did was they did a big systematic review on newspapers, global newspapers. They had their methodology to find out innovation in the discourse, and they saw an increase of innovation up to 2015, 2013, 2015, and afterwards a decline in innovation on the conventional cars. On the other hand, the companies are coming up with more and more models, so more choice, more variety for all the preferences on EV cars. So from 2009, this year was about more relief. Sorry, doesn't read very well. 0, 5, 10, 15, 20. Okay, we are coming from 1, 2 per year up to 20. So one order of magnitude when we get afterwards. And this logistic, by the way, I created 20 minutes ago before the class. So this was me. Okay, the raw data are the dots. So what this point here from Financial Times they want to make is that Tesla is kind of showing the envelope where to go to the others, and the others are following. And clearly, this is range, and this is the years from 2009 to 2020. And these are the models, so the range that is the cycle WLTP is the range that the automakers say the car does. So here we see that there's clearly an exponential improvement in terms of the range, in terms of the performance of the cars. And here is something that we actually studied and we saw on the data. It's very interesting. This is from the Global Electric Vehicles database from the International Energy Agency, published last year. And this is the share in net additions. So, you know, the idea is to see not the wholesales, but to look at the numbers of cars that are added to the park. Okay, and because you know some of the sales are going to substitute the previous cars, so this gives us a better understanding of what is happening in terms of the enlargement of the park of the cars, the global park. As what we see is that around 20 to 25%, 1 in 5 yearly cars added is actually an EV. So this is for global. If you know, it was when 1 month ago I had a meeting with people from. I'm not going to tell because it's a popular brand. It's a fuel retailer in Portugal, and they were discussing. Oh, we need to research about hydrogen energy. I said, well, do you have a similar research on EVs? Are you putting EV outlets for people to reach out? Oh no, no. We don't have that much electric vehicles here. Are you nuts? Do you know that the best-selling car in November in Portugal was the EV, was the electric vehicle? So yeah, they were surprised. It's surprising me because they sell fuel. They should be one. All right. So this is the electric car registrations. This is the electric car registrations and sales between 2015 and 2020 from the International Energy Agency. So in the light shade plug-in hybrids, in dark shade these means the battery electric vehicles. So battery cars, electric vehicles, as I am meaning here. So we see that there's been lots of increases, especially in Europe and China. China is a very important market. This is the market that sells the most in the world, is where EVs are ramping up very fast, and they have an industry already of electric vehicles there. And I want to draw your attention not just to Japan, Korea, especially look at UK, France, and Germany. All these countries have good incentives, a good incentive scheme and subsidies for the adopters of EVs. But I want to draw your attention to these guys: Netherlands, Sweden, and Norway. Can you believe that this Netherlands, for instance, have nowadays around 1/3 of the cars being sold to the EVs? Sweden, this number is going almost to half, and especially Norway, 75% of the cars. So nowadays are EVs. And I suggest you go online and watch a couple of channels on YouTube. There's one, Björn Nyland, who actually tests all the EVs in the market. They put the car, he has a consistent protocol of tests. And this car is followed by a lot of people. You can even watch beautiful Norway and stuff. And it's interesting the way that to see that they have all the infrastructure. The infrastructure was not there when they started the channel, but it was not. This is important because has been long an issue in economics whether infrastructure should come first, and for a long time the consensus was that infrastructure comes first. But I'm also working on this. Maybe, and clearly we see with EVs that the infrastructure didn't come first, but the demand come first. And then because the demand is so wide, infrastructure just came after the demand. And clearly nowadays, if you look at Norway, I'm pretty sure that we are working at Portugal in 2 or 3 years' time, because they already put the infrastructure, they have superchargers everywhere. It's very interesting. So 75% clearly ICE is phasing out in Norway. But there are not just technological innovations. I'm actually glad that you were having a class on social innovations. There are also some social innovations that actually thread the role of the car in the center of consumption, of family consumption. Look at, for instance, the case of sharing economy, motivated by emergent digital innovations. So this graph shows you the evolution in 2022, yeah, for this year, from Statista, the evolution of sharing, riding sharing. So the Uber, Lyft, all these things. And this gives the percentage in terms of the rides, passenger rides. And we see that actually what the market, which is leading the riding hailing, or riding, the sharing in terms of shared mobility is particularly, it's very interesting because it's China, but also it's very popular in Finland. Once I was in a conference, following the conference, and there was someone from business, a developer of this new concept. And this concept is interesting because the way they are developing, they are not just developing Lyft or Uber. Nowadays, they are developing mobility associated with real estate developments. So you buy a house, but you also buy the mobility for that house. So the concept is really becoming more and more popular in lots of Berlin, in capitals in Europe, but also is increasing the way the services they are supplying. Singapore, Qatar, and United Arab Emirates is very interesting. So people from the petrol states, let's say. So sharing rather than holding is on the rise, not just in global north, especially in global south. Very interesting. More than 2 million cars were not sold in 2016 because people prefer to share instead to use the apps and not own the car. But of course, this doesn't cover, it's not for everywhere, especially for the highly populated, densely populated areas. But it's a trend that actually threatens the conventional organization of the car industry. Passing to the technological side, we have this case is very rapid to show you. This is the case of the conversion, from the conventional light bulbs, incandescent light bulbs, the IFLB, as I mentioned here, incandescent, to the new type of very efficiently LED that are many times more efficient than incandescent light bulbs. We'll see in a minute. First of all, they were so this graph is mainly for the US. The past decade, like in technology, history, have the incandescent and the halogen, which is actually an evolution from incandescent. And this has been actually phased out by CFLs first, and then CFL stands for compact fluorescent lighting, and LED. Something to do with the sorry, but this, it has actually, this is for the US, but in Europe, the transition was much more, because in the meanwhile, there has been some issues. Trump actually removed the regulation, which actually obliged to change to more efficient. And then this was actually revoked again. So yeah, even in the state which actually transited less rapidly, things change and let it change fast. What happened? Back to 20 or 30 years ago, there were companies which actually saw lots of opportunities if the the market changed to more efficient because lights, because of environmental issues, of course. And then they teamed up. The network evolved to compress also governments and European Commission that started pretty much in Europe. The inefficiency of the old conventional light bulbs was an issue, as well as the impacts on the environment. They consumed a lot for little lumens, let's say little service. And at the same time, clearly there were technology improvements that gave more opportunities for profits for this industry. So all this actually allowed to create this network of industries, and then they successfully persuaded the Commission to put on the bans. And after the bans, actually the transition was pretty fast. And also was fast because first, if you remember well, the CPLs were very expensive. People were saying, oh yes, more expensive, not same quality, but hopefully eventually the price came down. Nowadays, people actually are happy because if you don't have the idea, normally lighting counts for 20%, 10 to 20% in a regular house of the electricity bill. But for here, probably it's about a third. A third of electricity bill of IGOT is probably from lighting, if not more. So efficient lighting is very important. So it's just a quick overview of the most important graphs. You see, this is the three technologies on green LED, so light emitting beam. On blue compact fluorescent lamps, CPLs, and the conventional ones in dark blue. You see that the lumens per watt increase much more, so this gives a perspective of the services per watt. So on the efficiency, clearly efficiency, and this is the price per bulb of LEDs. We saw that nowadays it's pairing with the others, so it decreased more than an order of magnitude here. So that's why the two put together, actually the advantage of changing for LED became clear in the past year. So this is actually sums up what we've seen in the previous one. Actually, this is an interesting graph shown in Wikipedia. On green is related with efficiency, so it's the flux, it's the service per bulb, which actually increased from 1970 to around 2011, and it continued to increase more. So the level of lighting emitted is much several times what it was in the beginning, as in the same way, because the cost of the bulb actually reduced and the number of lumens increased, the cost per lumen decreased several orders of magnitude, and after this time we saw from the previous graph, it even reduced more than an order of magnitude. So here it shows that the rhythm of improvement of technology was very fast, was exponential. So actually giving the idea that it was easier to implement the ban. So everybody was happy with, and so policy rapidly accelerated the transition from one state of lighting, one technology to another. Finally, last example is heating oil. Maybe we don't have that perception, but it's very good, big thing in the US. But at some point, especially after the fracking, gas became cheaper. The companies saw more opportunities with gas, so they stopped subsidizing new developments to have oil and to pass to other alternatives such as gas. Was also pollution concerns for the local air pollution, and the transition was also accelerating in the past years. Here is the natural gas, the way that natural gas went to the US residential heating fuel, and here is the heating oil. You see clearly that this decreased after the second oil crisis, and is actually going down in the recent days. So in this case, it's clearly not not the public government or the local government, federal government or the states putting legislation. This is arranged by the private actors. So that's why it's interesting. So here, this graph shows the market substitution for the US. We see that electricity only households, and back to 2050 are actually increasing. That means, you know, less room for oil, heating oil. But we not just in the US, in Denmark, same thing. So oil is decreasing this share in heating. So with these 4 cases that I've shown you, we can trace the mechanisms, and actually instead of telling the story, we just refer to the functions. And the way that the functions work is depicted in these 4 schemes, 1 per technology. First for the lighting technology, then for heating oil, then nuclear power, and then for the cars. It's interesting to notice one thing, that the legitimation played a role in the beginning, but then on both is the function which actually was more important and was associated to the triggering the feedback loops that actually accelerated the decline. So for instance, starting with lights, legitimation actually pushed the battery towards the exit because the industry start elaborating plans and implementing plans to phase out, and then to convince the legislature to impose the bans. And the bans actually creates the decline, because it's the legislation, the regulation that obliges to the decline of the market. It is the decline of the market which actually is central, because it reinforces the guidance, and it also set as a clear sign that resources should diminish for this technology. In the case of heating oil, it was a case, as I told you, it was a case of action in order to reduce the incentives for this technology and pass and incentivize the new houses, the consumers to pass alternative technology. So they reduce the resources, the subsidies for the clients, and this actually triggered several effects, such as not only the legitimation with this discourse about environmental problems, their local equality issue, but also the decline of the market itself. Nuclear, clearly the legitimation after the accidents, the legitimation had a role to reduce the interest of the country, so the society pushes for the governments for the phase out, limiting the market, and after limiting the market, there was a clear reduction in the resources allocated for nuclear, which actually fed back to the market decline and set a clear guidance for the companies, which actually couldn't afford anymore to construct the new power plants that are compatible with the new standards. This actually increased the legitimation of the technology. Finally, the cars, legitimation, the same thing in the beginning. But then clearly there was a guidance from the automakers itself, they sent themselves, like Volvo, like the others, that started to announce 2025 in the case of Volvo, 2020 in the case of Volvo, to start equipping with ICs, and so on and so forth. Then the governments is actually combined with the new alternatives coming, was responsible for less resources, less sharing, dropping shares in the market, and more legitimation. So we find here actually grounds for documenting and for validating these functions. Conclusions? Well, I prefer to conclude in the way that what does it mean of this work? So our objective, is that the transitions can be faster for a more sustainable future. So I decided to put it in an actionable way. So, what does all this means for the? I think there were some. All right. Okay. I didn't show you this graph, but I will show you in a minute. This was a discussion graph. This synthesizes. I'm going to show you just a table. There are these four cases, and as you see, for nuclear, the legitimation is clearly more important. For internal combustion engines, the guidance is more decisive. For market decline, for the light bulbs, the decline in the market with all the regulations, and for heating oil, the resource demobilization from the private actors was more important. So, sorry for not presenting the flip. So what can we learn? So to accelerate phase out, now we at least document processes of decline that can be acted upon to turn more rapid the transition, at least by the policy maker. Functions can be triggered either by the social acceptance part, so social political mechanisms, or alternatives and technological contexts. The legitimation and guidance toward exit stem from socio-political alterations, and whereas market decline and resource demobilization might come from technological change. But especially, this is very important, is the function interactions that create these cumulative effects. As you saw in the previous, is when there are feedback loops that actually the transition accelerates. And this actually has a meaning for the policy. For instance, if you want to push faster different types of technologies in the market, just don't go for ban one technology. Go by using simultaneously different policies. One, you can ban the old technology, but you can, if you create also incentives to adopt new technology, but not just new technology, because it's not just a matter of changing the cars, it's changing behavior of the people. If you put people with good alternatives in terms of public transportation, or giving more cases of watching online and working online, the whole mobility can be transformed faster. So the policy mixes are very important. We still have some work to do in order to analyze more cases, very probably see if there are more functions to add to this list. And yeah, the paper is finished, it's under review right now. Thank you for your attention. I don't know how time it takes, but sorry. Thank you. I'm open for questions if you have.
Yes. Thank you very much. The question now, yeah, from the room and from home, perhaps. Yeah, we can stop sharing and see. Oh, there is one question there. Yeah, there is João. Yes, João. Yeah, go ahead.
First, Nuno, thank you so much for the presentation. It was very interesting. I actually have a lot of questions, so let's see where to start. I'll start from chronological order. Let's say in the start, you mentioned the different factors that can influence the deliberate decline, for example, and you mentioned citizens. After previously you had mentioned the social political context. Is there a reason why you differentiate between citizens and social political? Are they not included in that?
So, well, the idea is that social political factors are different. Is to distinguish social political from technological related. So, emergent technologies that actually trigger the changes. So, I would say that citizens would be in the first part, social political factors.
Okay. Okay, so I mean, if other people have questions, I might as well give them the room because I still have a lot. Sorry. I don't know. So when you speak about the factors, you had the lower demands and you had, I'm missing the name of the other, let me see, I write it down. You had either lower demand or
emerging technologies.
Exactly. Yeah, but when you say lower demand, does it also it goes to a lower supply? But no, I mean it goes to a lowering in demand. But would also a lowering in supply be relevant? For example, the change in IC cars, it's going by lower demand and changing context. But eventually, with fossil fuels draining out, it could also be the lowering of supply going for the change. Have you come across any case in history where the change has come from the supply disappearing, for example?
Well, it's very famous in energy economics that the world of stone, the period of stone, didn't end because there were not enough stones. Yeah, probably I can't remember, but you're right. Whenever something is more rare, there are cases that when raw material is rareifying, people and the society and the systems find alternatives. I give you one example, which actually today people are doing the opposite. Okay, so butter. Can you remember which thing come to substitute butter?
Margarine?
Margarine, exactly. Nowadays, margarine is so expensive that people are returning to butter.
Okay, thank you. A couple more, if that's okay. When you showed the graph regarding the decrease in heating oil, you said that it was offset by the increase in natural gas. However, they were peaking in the exact same year, so I don't understand how you can explain one with the other.
Yeah, okay. There are several effects, but the thing is more recently, and that was the point that I wanted to make, especially in the US, which is an important market for heating oil, because of the discovery of this fracking oil, a natural gas from the fracking, actually creates a huge, they call it a huge supply of cheap gas available. And so there was incentives for the companies to push the consumers and households for natural gas instead of oil. And oil was becoming a premium as well at the same time. So that actually we saw an acceleration in decrease for the US of houses being hit by oil.
Okay, that makes sense. The fracking. Two more only, and I will let everyone. Sorry. So, well, you had a very interesting graph, which had the feedback loops and the interactions between the different. I can't remember the name, but you had the legitimation. Yeah. On the graph about the internal combustion engines, you didn't identify a feedback loop in the legitimation part, I think, from what I saw. But how did you come to that? Because I had the notion that part of that people are transitioning from ICE to electric vehicles, it's because they see the context changing, and that increases the legitimation speech as well.
Let me see. For the graph, the thing is the most important function is maybe not the one that triggers the process. As you saw, the legitimation was in all the technologies, but is one actually for a specific technology was important to trigger the whole loops, the feedback loops. Okay, mm-hmm. For cars, if I clearly, I think it was guidance of search. So the idea of guidance towards the exit that actually is triggering the feedback loops, the cumulative effects. Why? Because it's the moment when, especially when the automaker started, and then the government said, well, we're going to stop selling this thing. The automaker said by 2020, others 2025, others 2030. Actually, this gives us a strong direction to the industry that this is going to be like that, and they should prepare. So this actually is structuring the way that the processes is then evolving. You see, then of course they put more money. For instance, we saw that with Mercedes. Immediately, Mercedes cuts the R&D for IC and for plug-in hybrids in 80%, and they actually move this money plus more money to develop electric cars. And we are seeing now this was back to 2018, 2019, and we are seeing now them to come with several models electrified. So you see, this guidance was very important for not just for the strategy of the companies, but also for the governments to set goals to phase out these cars from the streets and to put money, like in the US, for instance, they want to have half of the cars sold in 2030 to be electric. So you see, there are now incentives and policies that were put in action in order to reach that goal. So that's why this particular function is very important and connects with market decline, research, and demobilization, and so on.
Okay, so in your data, you don't see that there's a feedback on delegitimizing the combustion engine technology. It's just the growing force towards the other one. It's not actually on the technology that existed.
Yeah, those dimensions for sure are very important. It's just that for that specific technology, internal combustion engine, guidance has shown to have had a more prevalent effect.
Okay. Okay. Final question. So on your next steps, on your next steps, you had to increase the amount of data, the historical studies. But I was wondering, is your objective with this amount of studies, case studies, to be able to actually go towards predictions where you identify several key points of a technology that might be steering towards decline? Is that the goal, or what is the goal with this? Is it just a backlog of information?
You're right. Do you remember the graph on nuclear? It was the last graph I showed you. It had the dimensions and it had operational metrics to analyze each one of the dimensions. Remember that? Yeah, with colors. They had plenty of colors.
Yes.
Right? You know, we created this graph based on famous, well-used metrics, and we associated these metrics in innovation to each one of the dimensions. But there is no protocol on that. And we did that for one single technology, nuclear. And actually, this gave us one of the most important motivations to start comparing technologies, and hopefully more people will do also the same job. And we are now trying to push and know a little bit and document more decline functions. And then, of course, we don't plan to do everything. More people will also jump on the wagon, and will also look at the indicators. And of course, we need metrics, indicators, and we need more studies to fundament these indicators. But you are totally right to grasp the good idea, and I congratulate you. And even I invite you to follow and to test several metrics for the right decline processes, because decline processes are very important nowadays.
Thank you.
Thanks for the questions. Great.
Question here? Yes.
Yes, I have a question that relates to this last question. I was wondering if your result of this particular study might not be influenced by a certain information bias, because in the beginning you said you searched for those papers and you said you're looking at industries or technologies that are in decline, and then ex post you are explaining why they are declining. If you now take these two identified factors, of course they are all declining. So have you considered looking at counterexamples, for example, where we see a decline in legitimacy, but still the industries do not decline?
Thanks for the question. That's a great question. You know, in qualitative studies, we have always possible bias. We try to reduce the biases by the expert participation to direct us to some transitional process ongoing that actually are less polemical, let's say. There's for sure one very polemical nuclear I mentioned to that. But you gave a good example. Try to find some kind of counter example of, or even in the past, try to see if there was a technology which was giving plenty of signs of decline but lasted for ages. Yeah, that's a good example. We try to reduce all the bias possible, but it's impossible to reduce bias. But that's why we rely on the theory. We try to make small steps. Try to start now, not look at all the list of functions, but just the only ones that actually have a good background in the theory, and then try to document these functions. But yeah, your suggestion is actually a good one. I mean, we should mention this in the discussion, like something, an additional check. Thanks a lot.
Yes. I may have one, yeah, but you first. Yeah. I have a question for the professor. Well, it's one, and kind of one, it's kind of two questions, but the second one is not directly related with your presentation, it's more about what you think about the subject. So the first one, you mentioned like the nuclear power is the market is in decline, and now we see maybe also because of the conflict in Ukraine and how Russia has been using natural gas as a kind of policy-making tool, and how, and you know, for example, we have like, for example, kind of like two sides of the balance. We have one side, the French, with the nuclear, like kind of like pushing against for nuclear in Europe to help the guide the transition for like cleaner energy. Then you have the other side, the Germans, with Nord Stream 2, at least they were like pushing, and now they are more refined about that. And how you think if like the current geopolitical feeling at the moment is going to affect the transition,
the energy strategy.
the energy transition, and if the French will be able to push the policy upfront, and is still related with this, but not related directly with your presentation, is how you perceive, for example, the hydrogen and the other alternatives for the transition, because I know like to develop 2 megawatts of hydrogen, to develop 1 megawatt of hydrogen, you need 2 of electricity. So how is going to be the phase out there, and if you are going to be able to do it until 2030?
Yeah, these are very good questions. Let me, by the way, the Germans are clearly on the renewable energy pathway. They show, you know, nowadays plenty of photovoltaic everywhere, and very cheaply, even the least option in many places. So they are clearly on renewable energy. They truly believe on that. And you don't have only the renewables. You have also wind, offshore wind, online, onshore, offshore, and you have other types of technologies. But let me respond to you with an example, just to see how not far away how the French meet immediately the limits of their strategy. I sent an email to Monjardino. I think it's Carlos Monjardino, because he wrote something on the very nice. He wrote something very good, and I added this information to him, because this information was widely diffused in the French newspapers, not something on internet. It was on Le Figaro, Les Echos, so mainstream, but it didn't come here, which was at the same time that Emmanuel Macron was calling Monsieur Putin to discuss about the refugees in Ukraine. He called every day. It was in the end of February and the beginning of March. Actually, at the same time, an important part of the discussion was about the new division of General Electrics in Belfort, because what happened is Alstom had major restructuring back to 4 years ago, and after this restructuring, they sold the division of turbines. Remember all the problems with the suppliers. They sold the division of turbines to GE, so General Electric, to the Americans. And then General Electric now is in restructuring, and they want to sell this the same division to the French. And this division actually has an important plant in Belfort in France with it's all the knowledge on the turbines, which actually are the most used in France, and a lot of employees in this site in Belfort. So the thing about nuclear is that most of the providers of the fissile material are former Soviet Union republics. For example, Russia and Afghanistan. And then, for this particular case, Kazakhstan, of course, they sell Kazakhstan, sorry. And for this particular plant, actually, the most important customer of the turbines is Rosatom, are the Russians. So he wanted to make sure to have to keep the same customers in the future, and the strategy to keep the same customers is to make a deal with the Russians before another ultimatum and another sanction packet with the Russians to have them to buy 20% of the new division that is going to be bought by the French. So most of the talks was about nuclear energy. Now you see all this security of supply. Think about the nuclear. Nuclear is better because it improves security of supply. You see now that security of supply is more difficult, and you have create even more connections with the Russians if you go with the nuclear. And the second question was about hydrogen. Very simple. My main kind of flag was, in the formative phase of technologies. I really for 10 years, and I lost a lot of grants because I submit the grants to FCT. Every time I lose the grants, but I was researching in my own, comparing different technologies in the past, how long they needed to reach a certain scale in order to upscale and stuff. I was focusing on this formative phase and come up with, there are two papers where actually something like, it's not a rule, but it's not very far away, but it lasts 20 to 30 years, the formative phase. Between the moment that you have the first unit commercialized in the market until 10% of the cumulative, of the ultimate market, let's say, or 2.5% of the market. It lasts 20 to 30 years. Now we are in 2022, and we must solve the problem in order that in 2050, you have already net zero society, so you don't have 20, 30 years to create a new solution. You must deal with the things that you are already in the formative phase, otherwise we are running out of time. Hydrogen you have several technologies in hydrogen. Some of them are closer to the market, others are very far away. But yeah, in some cases, starting to upscale immediately. I tell you one example with, this is a quick one. Do you remember Pelamis? Once the Portuguese state invested a lot of money in a converter of electricity of the waves. Oh, yeah. So they bought a big thing with a big investment, it lasted 1 month. So the problems of huge upscaling, very fast upscaling, the technology is not ready, sometimes it has some trouble. But I think it's a very, very good question.
Yes, yeah, very good discussion and presentation. Mine is only it's a question on industrial dynamics. I don't know nothing about nuclear or land or oil, but about cars, one of the things I might know. And I think that if this is a new technology, one would expect to have new leading firms, because supply chain is a bit different from some parts. We need still lead wheels, but besides that, many parts are very different. So it strikes me that incumbents are leading, except Tesla, maybe the one outsider, but they are dominating. Can you give us your why is this? In other technologies, we have seen this, like on television, firms were evolving. This is a good conversation to introduce related variety, because in television, the leaders, they were coming from radio. So here in the car, the electric cars, still the car industry, but it would be possible to have a different, would be reasonable to expect new firms, new players, because this is a new technology. But in the end, it's Mercedes and Toyota. Maybe they are a little bit late.
Who knows? They are coming back. But yeah, great question. First of all, in the history of innovations, the history is full of first movers that actually went bankrupt. And well, one can argue that Tesla is one first mover, but there was Nissan, which actually tested first the industrial massification of the industry. So no, I'm surprised. A lot of people surprised that Tesla didn't fail. But maybe this is because it was not really a first mover in the first place. But then about the incumbency. Yeah, that remembers me the theories of Hill, for instance, the incumbents that resist the regime, the change in the regime. But then he wrote about the nice incumbents around 2015 that actually they have the meetings and they can accelerate the transition. So there are these two perspectives, resisting or accelerating if that is good if they want to avoid a disruption. That means they want to avoid a new technology coming and disrupt them from the market. So they knew that from the previous case, so they invested in the transition. In EVs, I don't know, because of course, Volkswagen is coming now with the ID and MQA platform. They have some models, but Tesla is the first. It's setting the pace. In terms of performance, is obvious that they are setting. They have many problems, but in terms of performance, range, and everything, they are setting the pace. And then the Chinese. Nowadays there are plenty of new brands coming from China and invading Europe, and they have a huge market. They have actually exploited to increase in scale. Yeah. So there are plenty of challengers of the incumbents, and it is not clear that the incumbents will survive. Many of them probably are not going to survive and will have to consolidate with others. So yeah, I would say that it's not clear. Some of them are actually moving fast. For instance, Polestar is Volvo, a jelly group from China. So Volvo is going very fast. And of course, the VW, the Volkswagen Group, with Audi, they are also going fast. Mercedes as well. Smart Chinese also. Smart Chinese, right?
Mercedes is Chinese.
Yeah, but there. It's not just incumbents.
It's the same Group.
Highways is Chinese. It's a completely new brand. Even Chinese bought MG. Remember MG? So there are a lot of newcomers.
Okay.
So it's not just for income. I think we see both. We see both. But just a minor note on relatedness and unrelatedness. Probably this is a case of unrelatedness because you are seeing more the merge of two completely separated industries: electronics, digital industry with the cars, the conventional cars, and there's here a case of unrelatedness.
Josh? Yes.
Thank you. Two questions. One, I was really fascinated with the presentation. Thank you very much for that. And the first question is a bit provocative. Sometimes I am provocative. And the question was, one of the reasons why I got fascinated is because when following the title or the concept, which is technological innovation systems, I felt that it is like publicidade enganosa. And I'm going to tell you why. I suppose you imagine why I'm going to say this. Because it is actually technological innovation in the sense that our technology is being replaced by other technologies. But everything is about the process, which is a socio-political process. The technological part of what you have described, analytically, is basically absent. Okay, the element is technological, but it is a much more. The great interest on this is to understand the socio-political issues which are behind the way how there is a decline in technologies and replacing direct technology. So why there is this idea of technology? Because words have meanings. And my worry is that there is a general trend, or might be, that I see geography as a social science, to devaluate social sciences. And by labeling important processes as technological ones, what we are saying is that the managerial technological order actually is the explanation for everything. And it covers socio-political processes, which are actually the basis for this understanding. So this is the first question, and I would like to have your opinion on this. The second question is, maybe more pragmatic.
Do you want me my response to the first one, then you can elaborate
Yes,
the second?
no, yes, fine, yes.
It's right away. I totally subscribe what you said. I think you're right. It's just that I could not elaborate more the social processes behind each of the cases, because this is a social process. It's not for nothing that one of the big dimensions, that triggers are social political ones, and the second one is about the lower demand. Now, you see people in each time. It's just the processes. For instance, I'll give you the example, and I close that example. But you're right. I probably should put more emphasis on the timeline, what the agency, the strategy of the different actors. But then it's difficult to sum up and to give you the overview. But I'm giving you an example. Back to the 90s, the industry actually saw that they could have an opportunity with the new technology for the lighting, and because there was also some focus on the context about climate change. Was the time of the Rio meeting, so they found there a niche, an opportunity to actually bring this issue to lighting. Lighting was important. They have the good technologies, and the government should do something and should ban. So there was a social political. There were some coalitions that were put in place in order to pursue that strategy, that eventually they convinced the governments, and then the government, especially the European Commission, came on board. And there are many social processes in parallel. It's just that I didn't have the time to explain all the intricacies of each one. But you are totally right. I'm with you. The social processes are absolutely important.
You did it in a very, appealing way. The question is moving maybe a little bit upstream, which is the idea of it is not just a technological innovation system. There should be something like technological, not just technological, socio-political. Even in the terminology used, I don't know why, because it's the first contact with this topic. I think that the socio-political should be in the definition of the process that we're analyzing. This is modern technology, from my perspective.
Yeah, but this is a really good question, because this is a system, so an innovation system. We are analyzing an innovation system, a construct, which is built not around a sector. It's not a sector innovation. It's the same systematic line of thinking, of thought. But it could be around the sector innovation systems, around the nation, national innovation systems, But this is around a technology, and actually the technology innovation system is the idea that it doesn't have geographic boundaries. It can actually embrace different countries, but it's a system, a community created, a system of actors, networks, institutions created around the technology. So the focus is more on the system. Just I probably should give here the definition of technology innovation systems. It's something like actors, network of actors and institutions that are constructed or are aligned around technology, around the research, development, and production and use of a certain technology. So that is the definition. That comes from the works of not just Woodwall, but Carlson and Sienkiewicz. But the social part, maybe that was my fault, can be. I focus, or I try to sum up with some graphs, and I was just giving too much focus on the technology.
You're right. It was the merit of your presentation that made emphasize the social, political side of it. So you emphasized it. I mean, you really did. And the other question is, now responding to one of the questions, you're saying that there are more than 30 years between something starts to be an innovation appears in the market, and then it reaches a level which makes it, I don't know, economically interesting. To scale up the innovation. Now, some of these innovations, in principle, have to have to reach that level faster. And my worry is, if you do this faster, in order to increase the gains, probably the, I don't know what is it in English, but unitary cost of this thing must be higher, because you have less time to reach that point. Doesn't that mean that you are increasing inequality? By saying, you've given the example that some people now talked about the car industry, but thinking, for instance, about energy. Okay, I understand energy, nuclear energy. We can say, okay, the cost, you have demonstrated that the cost is higher than sometimes people will speak about. But now we are entering an old new stage of macroeconomics with the return of inflation, right? Some economists say that France, for instance, has higher possibilities of controlling inflation because they rely more on nuclear energy, so they can control more the impact of energy costs. This means that this apparently is favorable for everyone. If they can't, or if they do as Mélenchon proposes, which is to follow Germany and to end up in nuclear energy in France, which I think is a quite positive view, doesn't that mean that if we increase the cost of energy, this will be much worse for the people who have less resources than for the others? So the overall question is, if we make this transition too fast, are we going to increase inequality? And then to close the gap will take years.
That's a really good question, and actually I was running out of space, and one of the next steps I want to make is look at the impact of decline, because the impact of decline can play a role in the dynamics and in the time of decline of a technology. And you know, if we mean that decline of all technology pollutant is a good thing, the time it's of a huge importance, because we want this time to be short, right? And for that, maybe we should start also looking at the way that this decline impacts on the communities, because maybe some communities are going to be worse off. Even if in the entire country people will be better off, maybe some people connected with the old industry will be worse off. For example, people working for Sydney for the old coal power plant,
or just transitions. And I'm thinking myself, and also in how the European societies are evolving in demographic terms, which is the large percentage of old people, which normally take longer. I'm thinking myself again. Look at the old man, which means that we take more time to join innovation. And because the number of old people in European societies is large, we have to think how these people will join innovation. I think people do amazing things in the digital society. I know my father and other elderly that I see doing incredible things, for me unexpected, in using computers, smartphones, everything. But in the other way around, to some things, when we're old, we are more resistant to innovation.
But I didn't forget about your question, but specifically on electricity and nuclear.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really polemical that nuclear is that cheap. Actually, what is happening in France is that after a couple of years, they have this virtual power plant where they oblige, the government oblige EDF, the French company, to sell on losses one part of the electricity generated in the nuclear power plants to other competitors in order to create competition. I can tell liberalization. Once I was reading this thing from the European Commission from France, they should improve the competition. I bought some stocks from the company that was a competitor and lost everything. 85%. Yeah, the thing is, most of this is on loss, and actually one of the reasons why it's on loss, because sometimes it's the pricing, the way they are pricing electricity from nuclear power plants. For instance, if there is insurance, there is no insurance on nuclear power plants. If there is a fatality, it's the country in each case. There is no insurance, so they are not paying for insurance, and they are not paying. For instance, they are not costing for they are probably costing for to put the same part as they built in the past, but not in the same scale of costs us to renew, like to reconstruct a new park. So it's clearly subsidized nuclear power plants. And just to end, the problem with electricity, I really fascinated why there are not people, economists of energy, pointing out that this issue. If I'm going, remember, think that I'm an agriculture and I produce potatoes. I'm going to the market to sell my potatoes. If someone comes to me and in the beginning of the day, probably I still have plenty of potatoes, I think that more people will come, probably I will charge 10. Thinking that, well, if that people ask me for a discount, I probably let go the potatoes for 9 cents the kilo. But then at the end of the day, there are people coming to me and maybe their little demand, and I want just to, to let them, just not to bring the potatoes back home. I just give it like for 7. Or maybe there are too many people asking for potatoes, there are not any more potatoes, and the potatoes work well. And what people say is that, let's take the price at the end. Let's take the 12, at the end, the 12 is the reference. It's like in the stock exchange, and you will see now why I'm bringing this issue. If you have a stock, there is a price in the moment, and it clears the difference. You say, well, I'm selling at this price, that's okay. And at the end, in the news, they just show the final price. But you only received the price you sold, right? Not with electricity. And this is a scandal, actually. I don't know how people are not reacting like that. Electricity, you say, I'm selling my electricity 10. But at the end of the day, there was too much rarity, too much demand, and the price arrived to 100. You are not receiving 10, you are receiving 100. Why? The market clears at 100. Fine, but the producer only asks 10. Why is receiving 100? Why a producer of solar PV that is or wind is asking the market just for 9 cents per kilowatt, not even 7? They are receiving 200. Why? But they receive 200. So the rule is putting all this, what the economists say, the surplus is capturing the old surplus and putting to the producers. And this creates actually a huge cost of the electricity. And this is the scandal. No one is just going back and seeing how the market works and pricing the issue.
Very good session and discussion.
Yes.
So,
Thank you for the
round
questions.
of applause to Nuno.
Yeah. Thank you. Great.
Oh, Daniela, you want to ask something?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Go for it.
sorry.
No, it was applying.
Thanks, Daniela.
Thank you for your class. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, see you next week. Here? Yeah.
Vou apanhar algumas destas na revisão, porque eu já digo não.
Okay.